A lot of people ask me about scaling lumber and other questions about how thick is it and how heavy is it and how wide is it and how long is it and all these different things. So, how much it costs, that's of a big interest to everybody. So I'm going to try to show you a little bit about it, and I don't think it's too complicated, really. What you have to do first with a piece of lumber like this is figure out the linear inches, really. So it's 33 feet long times 12, and then what you do is you take, that is a linear measurement still. Now you're going to take inches measurement across 17 inches and multiply that. And then you put 2¼ inches, because that's how thick it is. You multiply it by that, and you come out with 15,000 and some odd cubic inches. Now, if you want to get board feet, you divide that by 144, and you've got 105 or so board feet in this piece right here, times $6.50 a board foot, which comes out to about $685. So it's pretty expensive stuff, and it's exactly what we wanted, so that's okay with us. Now, I'd like to tell you exactly how much it weighs. You have to convert it from the cubic inches into cubic feet. So you divide it by 12 again, you've got cubic feet. Now it's 57 pounds per cubic foot. So this thing weighs about 499 pounds. It's pretty heavy stuff. So that's how that stuff is calculated. So you can get the price of it by doing that. You can get the weight of it, all those kinds of different things. But one thing I'd like to do is take you down the other end, because there's something else I want to show you. Now I'm down at the butt end of these flitches right here, the bottom end of the tree. It's quite a bit wider, and it's easier to count the annual rings down here than it would be on the other end, and more accurate. So what I've done is I counted them in that one, and I counted them in this one. Now, like I said, they're not from the same tree, and here's proof of it, because this one's very fast grown. This one right here is very slow grown. It's amazing, because this one right here, same size as that, this one's only 70 years old, and this one's 150 years old. So it's pretty cool. Let me show you some of this stuff. Now you can see the annual rings right in here really easily, because they're quite wide. And like I said, that relates to how fast it's grown. When it was really a young tree, it was growing really rapidly. These are over 1/4 inch or 5/16 of an inch of growth in 1 year. So that's pretty fast. And then it goes a little slower up in here, because I guess it didn't get the same weather or nutriments for some reason, but then it actually sped back up again up in here. And like I say, it's pretty fast grown. This one over here, on the other hand, is very, very slow grown. Very slow grown. It's impressive, really. And when it started off, it was started very slow. And I kind of estimated right from the center of the tree up in here about 10 annual rings. And then there's 30 annual rings from here to here. So I couldn't count all the annual rings in here, but they're all approximately the same width. So it was growing at the same speed the whole life of the thing. So what I did was I took this distance and I said, well, that's 30 more and that's 30 more. So I added it up, and then I added 10 more on the end. And this tree ends up having 150 annual rings. It's the same size as that one. So this thing grew more than 2 times slower than that one right there. So it's amazing. I'm here on the other end of these 2 flitches right here. And like I said before, that one was growing really fast, and this one was growing very slow. So ideally, they could be used for 2 different purposes. They're both Quercus alba, which is white oak, but they have different characteristics. I'm only interested in this outside grain right here. I don't want anything to do with the pith or the center of the tree. But this one I use for big, long, swept pieces. You can use it for bent framing, but it's not as good as that wood for bent framing. The stuff that's grown very fast like that has much more dense cells in it than this type of wood right here. So it soaks up less water, and it's easier to bend. The other thing I like about it is that it's got 45-degree grain in it, like this. So no matter which way you rip it out of there, you're going to have diagonal grain across the frame. And that's really ideal, because if you have corded frames, no matter which way, there's always a screw or a bolt in line with the medullary raise. And when it's 45-degree grain like that, right in here, you never have that problem. It's less likely to split, and it steams up easier, everything about it. So this is very useful. It's incredibly nice wood. We're going to cut it up for chines and rails, on a couple of boats that we're building. And we're probably going to do the same thing with that, although ideally, like I said, that would be used for bent framing. Here's the saw that I'm going to be using right here. It's got an 8-inch blade in it, and it cuts 5.5 inches from the edge of the table. So I'm going to be nailing the batten down 5.5 inches from where I want to cut, and it'll slip along the batten right here, like this, right under the motor right there. So let's get cutting. The first thing I'm going to do is measure in from the edge of the sapwood, the inboard edge of the sapwood, on the narrow side of the lumber, 5.5 inches. Now, I'm going to do this right down the whole log, but they won't necessarily all be used. I'm going to use them to make a fair curve with the batten. It's much easier for me to sight the batten to a fair curve than it is for me to decide exactly how that curve would be alongside the sapwood. So I nail the batten on first, then I can pull a nail, move it anywhere I want, and get it to be a nice curvature before I start ripping it. I'm ripping these flitches on the same exact trailer that I delivered them here on because it makes a terrific workbench. It doesn't make any sense to take these off the trailer for any reason at all, to put them through a planer or drive them through a bandsaw or anything like that. It's too heavy. It's just too hard to move. It would take multiple people. So I pick up a portable unit and do the ripping right in place. Notice where the motor of the saw is hanging right over the batten. I've cut away some of the plastic there so I could maintain the full depth of the cut. Over 2.5 inches actually I can cut with it right now, following that batten. Following a batten like this seems to create twice the power in the saw because it's only cutting the kerf one time at the beginning of the cut. It doesn't drag the teeth in the kerf on the back of the saw blade and steal the power. That's the sapwood right there. We didn't pay for that, so we're just going to cut that right up into firewood. It's pretty much useless for anything else. Now I'm just removing the batten, and you'll notice that I left the heads up a little bit, and then I can just pull the nails with a hammer. Otherwise, if I nailed them down all the way, I would have to pry the batten up, and then I would have to flip it over and bang them out from the other side. So, I just don't drive them in all the way. Now I'm going to install a rip guide, and I'm going to trust the calculations on the guide temporarily, but I think I'll just check it real quickly to make sure it's cutting exactly 3 inches, and it is. So we're off and running, and this cut's going to be parallel in a sense to the first cut, or congruent to it, because I want it to be exactly 3 inches wide all the way down. There's no necessity to make it perfectly straight. Each piece may not be exactly the same when I'm done, but they're exactly the same width at least, and they'll spring onto the boat exactly right. Speaking of springing, you can see the lumber spring right off as I'm making the cut. And sometimes it springs away like that, and then sometimes when you get down near the other end, it kind of springs and tightens up the kerf. So, there's different things you can do. You just pry it apart a little bit, or you just back the saw up a little bit so it doesn't bind and then get going again. I'm getting an awful lot of dust on my pan head over there, and I'm going to have to wash it off as soon as I can because the tannic acid in it eats the paint job and the aluminum. So I'm going to take care of that, but we're motoring right along here with the cut, and we're coming near the end. As I reach the end of the cut, I let the saw stop rotating completely before I pull it out of the cut, or at least before I set it down anywhere, because the saw has no guard on it. Well, that's the second rip, but it's the first piece we're going to use. The sapwood's gone, And this is a nice piece, really nice. It took a little set, you see, as we sawed it. It sprung a little bit like that. So it doesn't matter to us because, you know, that's why we don't try to put a perfectly straight line on there, because a piece is not going to come out straight anyhow, no matter what you do. So, you know, just the way it is. But we're going to use it to bend into the boat, a 23-footer, as a chine log. So we're going to make it do what we want it to do anyhow. So, you know, we're going to put that away for a little tiny bit and let it dry a tiny bit before we start working with it. But we're going to cut another piece right here, another 3-inch one, 2 more out of this side, and we'll be done with this piece. I'll put the pith away somewhere just to see if I can find something to do with it. But that's the way it's done right there. And Skill Saw does a great job. It really does. People wouldn't think you could cut something that thick with a skill saw so easily, but it works fantastic. So we're pretty happy with the lumber, and we're going to keep working.